Hello and welcome to the Healing Insight Podcast, episode 55, with me, Sarah Hunt.
And me, Jez Hunt.
Hello and welcome. Here we are again, episode 55. Hi Dave, how are you? How's the weather up your way? There's been snow threatened this week, hasn't there? But we've not seen any of it, have you?
I went out for my walk this morning, and there were little flakes of snow coming down, but little tiny ones. They were very clearly well defined as snowflakes, but only a very few. I mean, a real smattering, not even a settling or anything. So yeah, we've seen a little bit of snow, but it's not quite that cold yet.
No, it's colder here than it has been, but it's not as cold as it was a few weeks ago. Thank goodness, because that was cold. So, well, today I thought we'd have a bit of a chat about cognitive dissonance because I think it's quite an interesting topic. And I think, sometimes things happen that turn our whole world upside down and we just can't get our heads around it.
Yeah.
Um, which is kind of what cognitive dissonance is. But I thought it might be quite interesting just to chat through it and talk about how it, different sorts of scenarios that can create cognitive dissonance and how we can maybe kind of shift ourselves so that we can see what's truth and what isn't.
Yeah, I think the simplest thing to start with is probably some form of definition of cognitive dissonance for those that are listening. And it's a psychological term that's used to describe sort of the discomfort or tension that comes up for us when we hold two potentially conflicting beliefs or values or ideas about something. So, or it could be when our behaviour conflicts with our beliefs, for example. So it's when you've got two opposing views on something, if you like, putting it in simple terms, that don't agree with each other, but you believe both of them to be true. So, for example, the simplest example I can think of is with smoking. So a person could strongly believe that smoking is harmful to their health, but continue to smoke. Well, if they do that, they are going, or they may experience cognitive dissonance because they know that it's bad for them, but they're doing it anyway because of possibly the secondary gain or the other benefits they perceive or kid themselves that they are getting by doing so. So smoking can be used as a stress reliever, to help with anxiety, to help with stress. That's certainly why I used to smoke. There's a lot around anxiety and stress. So they can continue to smoke because they perceive that relieving the anxiety and stress is more important than worrying about their health, particularly when they're younger and smoking, because death is not something we necessarily think about so much when we're younger. Teenagers are invincible. So it's something that then as you get older, you then have this conflicting belief. So you continue to smoke, it's bad for you, but you still do it because of the perceived gain that you believe that you're getting from it. So that's
because
just
you don't want to look at
because you don't want to look at the other side of it.
The other side of it. Yeah, I would agree. But you can also have cognitive dissonance in situations where someone else's behaviour is not what you
Absolutely.
expect, can't you?
Yeah.
So, you've got someone at work, perhaps your boss, you get on really well with them, you're doing some really good work with them, they're developing you really well, and then all of a sudden their behaviour changes towards you and you don't understand why and you don't understand what's going on. And this isn't the person that you've known and built the business relationship with. And it's kind of like it's very difficult then to kind of get your head around it. And you might even make excuses for the person. Oh, well, he was really stressed, or You must have just been having a bad day or whatever. But in actual fact, that might be a side to that person that you've not seen before, and you're making excuses for them rather than dealing with it head on maybe and saying, hey, what's going on here? Why are you behaving like this?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the smoking example as well, you can make excuses that actually, well, it's helping me with my stress, and you're completely burying your head in the sand to the fact that it's killing you. You know, it's damaging your health.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it's something that affects all of us at some level, at some point in our lives. Not necessarily all the time, but there's certainly. I don't think I've ever come across anyone that hasn't suffered from it in some degree.
Mm.
It can affect it can affect us in so many different ways. It can affect us with decision making. You know, just making a decision when we have conflicting views about something, actually getting to the point of making a decision when we're faced with a decision, we can experience the conflicting beliefs or values that we have around that decision. So that can create discomfort, which can then stop us from making a decision, because it's almost like, well, whichever option I choose is the wrong one, if you see what I mean, because they're conflicting. If I choose that, then that means that's wrong, but I believe that to be true. So, but if I choose that, then that's wrong, but I believe that to be true.
Hmm.
So it can actually put us into this sort of loop where we don't make a decision. It's easier not to make a decision and to let it go, or to bury it is probably more accurate, rather than actually make a decision and choose one of those to let go of, one of those beliefs or one of those things that we believe to be true.
Yeah. And that then comes with the evidence that's put before us, isn't it? And the evidence that we're willing to look at, and whether we actually tune into what's right, what is correct, what is truth with our heart. And that's where we know what truth is. So tuning into something, tuning into the situation, with your smoking, for example, if you were to tune into it with your heart and look at and be willing to look at both sets of evidence, yeah, uh, my experience is it um, reduces my stress. It helps me to feel calmer. But then the evidence is that it causes physical damage to your lungs, and therefore you're at risk of developing other issues. But then for me, smoking is maybe not the best example, because to me, smoking is just a symptom of another problem, and that there's something else going on that actually needs dealing with, and the smoking is stopping you from actually dealing with it. So because it's just pushing that emotion back down again.
Yes
But
and no. So yes, I I think it is I think it's a valid example. I think it's
I'm not
something.
saying it's not a valid example, but I probably want to complicate it, because as a healer, I look at it from a slightly different perspective.
Well, yeah, as a coach, so do I. I mean, our behaviour is based on what we're thinking, and it's connected to our beliefs and our values. So what we do is based on our interpretation, our internal representation of what's presented in front of us, which is based on our experiences of life up to that point, in whatever at whatever level. So if we're doing something that's knowingly harmful, so any form of addiction, then I would agree with you. There is something significant underneath that needs looking at, and the addiction is a coping mechanism. But burying your head in the sand is a coping mechanism.
Mm,
Doesn't mean it's right or
yeah,
wrong. It's not an addiction. It's just that's how you rather than
but it's
face
too.
up to it, and the so it's kind of like the was it the only fear is fear itself, fear of fear itself. So it's not actually necessarily the smoking could kill me. It's the facing up to the fact that maybe if I carry on like this, I could die because I'm encouraging that damaging behavior to me. So yeah, it's not a case. So with me, I tried stopping smoking. I mean, I haven't been smoking for 4 years now. Is it 5 years? November, 5 years this November. So for me, I tried giving up smoking loads of times and didn't. Yet when I healed the underlying problem, I stopped on the 2nd of November. 2nd of November, I had my last cigarette and I've not touched one since. And coming at, say, 4.5 years later. But that's because I dealt with the underlying problem. I didn't. So the smoking, because that was my way of coping or assisting, or I believed, assisting me to help myself with whatever the subconscious problem was, then I was kidding myself that it was actually helping me to get through life, knowing the damage that smoking was causing me. But it took until me solving the problem that the smoking was supporting in my mind to deal with that before I could let go of the smoking. Because yes, there's an addiction. Yes, there's chemicals in the body. And yes, nicotine is an addictive substance. However, I stopped overnight once the original problem, the significant emotional event that created the problem that smoking helped me relieve in my understanding at that time, then I stopped and I've had no cravings since. So yes, for something like addiction, I believe you're right. We have to deal with the problem to solve the addiction.
Yeah. But cognitive dissonance, I think you're right, is a coping mechanism, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's because when there's too much conflict, we can't actually deal with that conflict. And so we don't deal with it. And we end up sticking our heads in the sand rather than actually going, okay, so what is actually going on here? Why have I got these conflicting beliefs, values, the situations going on here? What is it that I need to address? And always, whatever we look at, it's always coming back to, what do I need to address? What is it that I'm being shown? What is it that I need to heal? But cognitive dissonance, I think, is something that can be quite well, it's difficult, isn't it, to when you've got conflicting beliefs going on or conflicting values going on. Your belief about someone is one thing, and then all of a sudden it's like your whole world is turned upside down. If you look at that scenario that I gave with the boss that suddenly got really horrible, and you make excuses for other people if their behavior changes, because you can't quite believe that they would be like that.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So
and you can't get your head around the fact that they would be like that, or they would have a reason to be like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be where it can affect you if you're in an abusive relationship, because you don't believe that the person who professes to love you would actually be that nasty and that horrible to you, and yet they are. And then you go in that route, well, I'm going to have to leave, and then they're all nice again, and then it's all, well, they obviously didn't mean it. So you end up making excuses, like you were saying earlier. You end up making excuses. Now, I'm not saying this is the same for everyone or anyone in an abusive relationship. Your experience is your experience. From my experience of the relationships I've been in where they've been abusive relationships, that is what, there was this conflicting stuff going on of why I should stay versus why I should leave. And I was making excuses more around why I should stay than just actually making that decision, although I ultimately made that decision later on, but making that decision of actually, I've got to go now. So for example, I'm just going a little bit left field here, but going back to what you were saying about burying your head in the sand, someone who absolutely categorically believes that there is no such things as extraterrestrials. Okay. So they have this absolute belief there's no life off this planet. And then let's just say a little alien spacecraft landed, and a little green man, alien, whatever you want to visualize it as, got out and walked up to that person, they would go through a whole load of stuff along the lines of, oh, it's a hoax. Oh, where's the TV camera? It's obviously some film program, reality program I'm being filmed on. You're just a guy in a suit, and that was lowered by some sort of crane. Where are the wires? Because you are so full of the belief that they don't exist, that life doesn't exist like that outside the earth, that you cannot comprehend, even when the truth is right in front of you, you
Yeah.
cannot comprehend it to be true because it
Yeah.
goes so far against what you believe.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a silly example, but it makes the point
No, but
that,
it makes the point, and I think there's been. I'm sure that people, if they stopped and thought about it, they could think of situations where they've seen people go into cognitive dissonance to that degree, where what's happened has been completely against everything that they believe. I'm sure I've witnessed it, you've witnessed it, probably you've experienced it as well, where where something I've believed in so strongly, and then it's been the complete opposite, and it's really difficult to get your head around when your belief system is being tested like that, because you don't want to admit that maybe you were wrong.
yeah, I think,
And that's ego coming in.
yes, it is. And the thing to remember is, going back to when we've talked about beliefs and things in the past, beliefs are stories that we adopt. They're not truth. They're not truth. They are truth for us in the moment we adopt them. And they are
Yeah.
truth for us for as long as we hold on to them. But we're not born with beliefs. We are born, we adopt our beliefs from our parents. So it'll be our parents' beliefs, our siblings' beliefs, and then as we go on to school, etc., etc. And yes, we will form, as we get older, we will form our own beliefs. But initially we start with what, we mimic what we see. So things like, I don't know, if you're living in a family where your parents don't like mushrooms, then chances are you'll never eat a mushroom. And any time you come across a mushroom, or not until you get older and decide for yourself, but you could have this belief that mushrooms are bad for you. Mushrooms are poisonous. Mushrooms are disgusting. Without ever having eaten one. Well, that's
Mm.
not that's not a belief based on your experience. That's a belief that you've adopted. So it's only as we start to get older and we start to challenge our beliefs. So Dad, for example, me growing up, my belief was that you had to work hard for money. We've talked about this before. You had to work hard for money, and you had to be grateful for the food on the table, the roof over your head, the clothes on your body, and anything else over that was a bonus. So,
That's not a bad thing to be grateful for,
no,
though.
absolutely. But what that meant was I was then driving much. So when I went into corporate and I was progressing through corporate life, I was pushing and driving myself to the point of 18-hour days, 20-hour days sometimes, to push myself to get the promotions, to get to the level, because I believed that's what I had to do to get to that level of responsibility, that level of experience in terms of managing a team of people remotely, and all the things that I did when I was in corporate. And yet there are people who aren't working anywhere near as hard as that who are earning more money than me. So I started to see that. So my belief was that I had to work hard to get that level of income. And yet there were other people around me that were proving to me their truth was there, who weren't working anywhere near as hard as I was and were on higher salaries than me. So to a degree, it was driving me because I was aspiring to be that person. But it was also setting up some form of cognitive dissonance of, well, my belief is this, and yet I'm seeing people who aren't working hard. In fact, some of these people don't seem to be working at all.
Mm.
But that belief was something I adopted from Dad. And it was only when I chose to let go of it and rewrite my belief around money that my experience with money changed. But unless you understand the belief and the conflict and where it's come from, or well, they don't necessarily need to understand where it's come from. It's understanding that that's what your belief is and that's what you believe to be true. But it's remembering that a belief is just a story, and a story can be rewritten. We can choose to change our beliefs, or we can choose to carry on believing them.
Yeah, and that comes then to learning to be more heart centered. In my That's my feeling anyway. Because as you become more heart centered and move out of your head and into your heart, you start to feel more what is correct and what isn't, and therefore which beliefs are outmoded now, and that you need to maybe look at and see whether you need to actually let go of those beliefs because perhaps they're not serving you for where you are now, where you've traveled to and how you've grown. Um, so we do need to be looking at our belief systems and whether they are truly serving us, because if we allow them to stay kind of stuck with us, then when something happens that changes things and turns our whole world upside down, we can really struggle to understand what's going on, why what's happened has happened, to and then to address whatever the issue is to be able to move forward.
Yes. When So going back to your point about beliefs serving us, when we form them, when we adopt them, create them, when we decide that that is truth for us, that belief is formed, it is serving us, and it is, in a lot of cases, it's there to protect us. It's there to help us make sense of the world. What can happen is, so our beliefs and our value system and the experiences we have create our perception of what the world should be like. So anything that happens outside of what we believe to be true can cause discomfort, disease within us, because it goes against what we believe. So actually, and that can be anything. So yes, it could be a belief conflict or a values conflict that can also cause unease or discomfort in situations. But it's being, for me, the biggest understanding I had in this area was just going on the basis that, okay, this is what I believe now, and when I took that belief on board, when I believed that to be true, when my belief around my belief is that it was true and is true for me until such time as I find something that I feel is there to replace it. Is so as my understanding expands, then there are more possibilities of what can happen. So, okay, if a child at school is left-handed, I mean, this may be not so much nowadays because I don't think they make a difference, but certainly when we were children, a child in the school class left-handed was encouraged to write right-handedly. So, in fact, even going back to mum and dad's era, left-handed writing was not normal. I mean, so
Yeah.
they were forced to write right-handedly and keep going until they could write with their right hand. Okay. So they then end up with a belief that either left-handed writing or left-handedness is bad, or, well, I must be odd or awkward or whatever it is, but they write right-handed. But as they get older through life and they start to use their left hand more and they realize it is actually more comfortable using their left hand, then that belief has now changed. So they adopted a belief in the first place, but through life experience or understanding, feeling, intuition, heart-centered feelings of truth, that actually using their left hand isn't a bad thing, because actually I can paint better with it, I can write better with it, I can do things better with it than I can with my right. You've now got the evidence of it that you've accepted to change that belief that you can only do stuff right-handed because otherwise people will criticize you or whatever.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does make sense.
I'm just trying. What I'm aiming to do is to give examples to explain what we mean by cognitive dissonance and how it can
Mm,
show up in our life in so many different ways. Just saying it's a feeling of unease that you get when you've got two conflicting values, well, or two conflicting ideas or circumstances or whatever, then that's not necessarily enough for people to start recognizing when it's happening.
yeah.
So the first point of all of this, if you want to deal with cognitive dissonance, the first thing is to understand it exists, understand where it's likely to show up, and therefore start to become aware when you have conflicting views on something, ideas, values,
Mm,
beliefs on something. Because if
mm,
you're feeling uncomfortable and you have two opposites going on and you believe both of them to be true, then that's cognitive dissonance. Something needs looking at there.
yeah, absolutely. It's it's an interesting topic, isn't it? But it's not the easiest topic to give everyday examples to, I don't think. It's easier to give extreme examples, isn't it?
Okay. Um,
I've got you thinking. Where, click, click.
I think the nearest one that I can come to is the one that you used. You know, when you're working with somebody and you have, um, so if you have a boss that you don't get on with or that you don't particularly like their style, but you have to work for them because they're your boss, and you can have negative thoughts towards that person. So as you start to work more closely with them, you can experience dissonance because you're kind of behaving in a manner that shows that you like and will get on and respect them, but you underlyingly don't like them because of their mannerism or their manner towards you or whatever it might be, their behavior. But you're having to change your behavior because of the position that you're in. So that,
But equally, you could have a situation where you have taken a dislike to your boss. Maybe you've got a new boss come in, changing things. You take a dislike to them, but then as you kind of get used to their working ways and get to know them a bit better, you kind of start to think, maybe they're not as bad as I thought they were. But you don't want to believe that because your first perception was that they were this person that was coming in, changing things, not listening to people, whatever. But then it kind of shifts and changes, and but then that makes you a bit kind of wary, doesn't it? Because it's like, I'm not sure how he's going to react to this, and I believe that actually he is going to listen to me, or he isn't going to listen to me. So there can be conflict in that kind of situation as well, can't there?
yeah, and that can be something we all have to deal with, overcoming resistance. When someone's made a decision, it's very hard to shift them. Doesn't mean it's impossible. You absolutely can. But in sales, for example, if I'm doing business coaching with clients, in sales, if you present an offer and somebody says no, they are more likely to say no in future times for the same thing because they don't necessarily want to admit to themselves that their first decision of no was wrong. So in the moment they say no, that offer isn't necessarily right for them. And in marketing, we're taught that you don't just make an offer to someone once, you know. I mean, so was it the statistics from way back when, 1998 or thereabouts, where it took 14 attempts, 14 contacts to get to a point where someone would say yes. And most salespeople give up after 2 or 3 attempts. So if a potential someone who's in the right market, assuming you're not just doing random people on the street, but if they're in the right market, you've identified the right type of person, they're your ideal client, blah, 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 all things equal, at some point, they're looking for what you offer, then you could go through 14 no's. It might even be more than that now, but 14 no's before you got a yes. Because with one person, because they're saying, no, it's not for me. I'm not ready. It's not the right time. They'll come up with all sorts of excuses. But one of the things we have to overcome is that resistance, the internal resistance. So it's not just the, no, it's not right for me, even though they might want that thing. It's that, well, I've made a decision no. So if I now say yes, I'm going against my original decision. So people don't want to doubt that what they've believed before is wrong.
Which is kind of cognitive
Which is
dissonance, isn't
kind,
it?
yeah.
Because they're not.
That's why I feel it's came up was, so when we make a decision on something, so I don't know. Okay, if I make a decision that eating fast food, McDonald's, KFC, whichever, there are plenty of options of fast food out there, and it's not, I'm not negative against any particular one. Well, not other than my own opinions. But if I make an opinion, if I decide that a particular fast food chain is not good for me and I don't want it, I don't like it, I don't whatever, then it's very hard to shift me to that point of actually trying it or saying, actually, one occasion it's not going to matter. So when I've been with Robbie or whatever, I've been to fast food restaurants with Robbie because he wanted one and I've not had one. Now, I could have done, I was hungry, but it was almost that principle of, well, I believe it to be bad, so I can't have it. Now, that doesn't mean that because I've made that decision, it has to stay that decision. I can choose to change it, and it's not necessarily, depending on circumstances, it's not necessarily a bad thing to change a decision, because what was right for me when I originally made the decision and what's right for me now aren't necessarily the same thing, because that decision might no longer be serving me.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you've got conflicting viewpoints going on, haven't you? Which is a form of cognitive dissonance, because you kind of can't get your head around the idea of actually changing that decision. Is that what you're getting at?
So in everyday life, when we make a decision and then we find we're resisting doing the opposite, it can be linked to, I mean, it depends what the situation is. It depends what the actual situation or the thing that we're talking about is. But it can be a form of cognitive dissonance. The bottom line is, if you've got a conflicting view on something, that's likely to create cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So watch out for conflicting views on things.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you've got conflicting views then on something, then it's a big indication that it's something you need to look at.
Yes, because there will be an underlying something that needs clearing.
Something.
And needs
Yeah,
addressing.
Absolutely. Yeah. That needs addressing, that needs looking at. Because, yeah, we don't want to be having conflicting views on something that is, on anything really. We need to know what is our truth.
Yeah.
Although, having conflicting views can be, like you were saying about the smoking, it was your truth, wasn't it? Both of those viewpoints were your truth. It does me harm, but it helps me relieve my stress, and that's your truth. But it's the one you were going with, the one that was assisting you more at the time because of probably the fear of actually addressing what was creating that need to smoke in the first place.
Yeah. Having conflicting views in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's not, it depends how it's affecting you and your life and how it's affecting you with your decision making. So in that instance with smoking, then, had I continued to smoke, who knows? I mean, there are people who smoke into their 80s and 90s and don't have lung cancer, and there are people who smoke and or have been in smoky environments, like, you know, people who've been worked in pubs and that, however many years ago when we used to smoke in pubs, that have died from lung cancers and things like that, that caused by smoking, secondhand smoke that they inhaled through the pub. So we don't know what's actually going to happen. But the point is, if you know it's bad for you, why are you doing it? But I had buried my head in the sand, so to speak, to that side of it. And I was looking at okay, it's not good for me, but I'm only, you know, 18, 20, 30, whatever, as I was going through my period, you know, my life. So if it is going to affect me in my future, then it's going to be way in the future. But what was more concerning in that moment was the stress and anxiety that I was trying to cope with, because at that time I had no understanding of other ways of coping with it.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's not an easy topic. It's quite a complex thing, and like you said, it's not necessarily that easy to give clear examples, but hopefully that's given some people to something to think about, reflect on, that might just give them a bit of a deeper understanding than they've got now of what cognitive dissonance is, how it affects us, and some of the things we need to be aware of to look at that can help us move away from it and move forwards. So
yeah, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? An interesting topic, and I think probably the kind of the best analogy is that it's where you've got conflicting beliefs, or you're holding a belief in it, and there's something that happens that creates conflict to that belief.
yeah,
And you bury your head in the sand because you can't actually get your head around the fact that your belief isn't what you thought it was.
yeah,
Whether that's a belief about a person or a belief about a situation or whatever it might be. So
yeah. If you've
yeah,
got a belief about something, and someone of authority tells you that something that goes against that belief, but because they're a person of authority, you then go on the basis, well, they must be saying something that's true because they're a person of authority, yeah, whether that's a boss or whatever. Then the fact that it goes against your belief, you start to doubt yourself. So that's cognitive dissonance, because you've got something that you don't believe being told by someone that you put that onus of, actually they're a person of authority, so therefore they must be speaking the truth, so therefore I must be wrong.
And then you can't get
And
your
then
head
you
around
can't
it,
get your
can
head
you?
around it.
And this of course then comes back to how important it is for us to listen to ourselves and what feels right for us, because what that person in authority says isn't necessarily right and may not be right for us. Might be right for them, but it might not be right for us. And that comes back to us then being brave enough to turn around and say, actually, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you, and understand that that's okay. That's okay for us not to agree.
And I would also just add something there, or I'd remove something there. I wouldn't say, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. Why should we be sorry that we don't agree with someone else's beliefs?
Yeah, that's true. Good
Because
point.
what that's doing is saying, well, you're probably right, but I'm not going to go along with it. When actually, it's like, actually, I don't agree with that. So I'm going to do this. You do what you want to do, but I'm going to do this.
Yeah. The I'm sorry bit is a very English thing, isn't it? I apologise for everything. Oh dear.
Okay.
Well, hopefully that's given listeners something to think about, something to to reflect on, and see whether they've got any areas of cognitive dissonance in their life, or to look around them and see people around them. Have your close family members or your friends or your work colleagues got areas of cognitive dissonance, just that you can get a better understanding of it, because I think it's something that's worth being aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time, Jay. Really good to catch up with you again today.
Indeed.
And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.